in the business world. Apple is known for many things: its sleek iPhone, iPad, its industry-changing technologies, and its massive market valuation. But the label of tax dodger is hardly one the company actually wants to be added at that list. Yet on Tuesday, Apple boss Tim Cook had to face U.S. lawmakers to address questions over billions and billions of dollars that are offshore and taxable. Roza Kazan explains.
You swear that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God.
The grueling hearing on Capitol Hill Tuesday lasted 5 hours. Executives from the maker of iPads and iPhones faced blistering criticism for their tax practices after a U.S. Senate investigation claimed the company deliberately shifted billions of dollars in profits overseas to avoid paying taxes in the U.S.
Apple has a highly developed tax avoidance system, a system through which it has amassed more than $100 billion in offshore cash in a tax haven.
The U.S. senators claim Apple sends more than 2/3 of its total profits to subsidiaries in Ireland, which pay little or no taxes to any government, taking advantage of the difference in how the two countries define tax residents.
For years, Apple has opted to forego fully contributing to the U.S. Treasury and to American society by shifting profits and circumventing U.S. taxes.
But Apple CEO Tim Cook fired back, saying the company complies with all U.S. tax laws.
We pay all the taxes we owe, every single dollar. We don't depend on tax gimmicks. We don't move intellectual property offshore. We don't stash money on some Caribbean island.
Cook also said the U.S. corporate tax code undermines competitiveness of American companies, echoing Senator Rand Paul, who said the committee should apologize to Apple instead of creating a, quote, bizarre tax code.
I'm offended by a $4 trillion government bullying, berating, and badgering one of America's greatest success stories.
But while other committee members agreed America's corporate tax code must be reformed, they said last year alone, major U.S.-based corporations were able to stash away almost $2 trillion in profits in offshore tax havens, and that is lost revenue for the U.S. government, already dealing with painful budget cuts. Roza Kazan, CCTV, Washington.
For more on this topic, Mr. Robert Wood, managing partner at the corporate legal firm Wood LLP in San Francisco, joins us. He's the author of some 30 different books on corporate taxes and a nationally recognized expert in that field. Thank you very much for joining us on Biz Asia America. Let me first start by asking you to help us explain these tax loopholes they keep talking about. How does it work in the simplest possible terms?
I wish, Philip, I had a simple answer for you. I think as 5 hours of testimony and indeed prior testimony on this very subject would indicate, by their very nature, these global corporate tax issues are hardly simple. I think there is some considerable frustration evident in Senator McCain's questions and indeed in Mr. Cook's responses on behalf of Apple. They're not simple. Our tax system is not simple, and indeed a company that has the global reach of an Apple or an HP has very complex affairs, and therefore those issues are not simple.
All right. I guess we agree that it's not going to be simple. So the next question is, in the testimony today by Tim Cook, I mean, he faced beatings from the right and the left in Congress, so it wasn't a partisan issue. Do you think Congress believes that Apple is avoiding taxes or just being smart about paying taxes?
I think that certainly the questions suggest, and Senator McCain, perhaps in particular, and Senator Levin, believe that Apple is avoiding paying tax. And you know, in some of Senator McCain's questions, it was very apparent that he thinks that. I think it's possible to answer your question with a bit of a, you know, sort of a yes, but, because I think that, as you say, Philip, there are both the right and the left criticizing Apple. I think it's important to say, as may have come up in the testimony today, that Apple is actually more conservative than some companies. I think Mr. Cook used the phrase that Apple, which is a helpful phrase, I think, that Apple does not engage in tax gimmicks, and he specifically noted that they do not use sort of IP, intellectual property offshoring agreements. That is a common technique, that sort of offshoring of intellectual property in a way that is being done by hundreds of companies worldwide,
Well, I mean,
hundreds of
that
American-based companies.
is a very good point, because it's not just Apple that's doing this. Hundreds and hundreds of companies are holding back potentially hundreds of billions of dollars in potential overseas profits that they haven't brought back to the U.S. Why do you think it is that Apple is being singled out the way it has been on this particular case?
I can't answer that. I think to some extent Congress, as we've seen in a broader focus on the IRS these recent days and weeks, Congress gets fired up over something. I recall a New York Times article about a year ago, in April or May of 2012, heavily criticizing Apple and I think some other companies, but sometimes it takes a while for those kinds of critiques to percolate through the system and to be the result of congressional hearings. But you're quite right that many companies have money that is quote unquote stashed offshore that is not being brought back, and that invites criticism into the U.S. tax system that seems to invite it.
I'm trying to help our international audience better understand this. You and I, we work for an employer, we travel, and we take that as an expense. Potentially that helps offset some of the individual income that we have if it's your own business. That could be construed as tax avoidance in some respects. From the corporate side, from Apple, what can the government really do in terms of reforms to make this a lot simpler for them so they're not in that position to begin with? It's not just Apple, it's all those companies.
Yeah, and you say, fair enough, I think there are doubtless a lot of listeners and viewers worldwide who find all of this rather confusing. To go back to a phrase that you used, Philip, in your question, which I think echoes something that Congress was asking about, or congressional members were asking about, which is sort of tax avoidance versus gimmicks and tax avoidance versus evasion. Nobody wants to be accused of tax evasion, which uniformly has a very negative and in some cases criminal kind of ring to it. Tax avoidance, however, or avoiding taxes, reducing one's taxes, is something that not only American businesses, but businesses worldwide and consumers are actually encouraged to do. It's the old quote from a famous U.S. tax case about arranging your affairs in the way that is most advantageous to you. You know, you're not under a patriotic obligation to pay higher taxes. So I think this testimony, although some of it may have been vitriolic, reveals that it is not merely Apple, and indeed that Apple has been more conservative than at least some other companies.
Robert Wood, I apologize. We're up against a little time issue here. I want to thank you very much for your insights on this. And of course, this topic's not going away anytime soon, but we do appreciate your efforts to try to explain this.